Okay, welcome everyone to Cross the Rainbow, a study of Norse mythology. I just want to preface this by saying we have a lot to get through today, and there's a lot of information I'm going to be throwing at you. So if you have, seriously, any questions at all or concerns, please stop me and I'll try to answer you as best I can. All right, so just some quick things before we start. The heavily condensed presentation I'm about to give today is on the Voluspa, which is essentially the Norse creation myth, which serves as the foundation for what we know of their culture, as well as some of the famous myths and characters that have worked their way into famous Marvel movie productions of the day. And what's important to know about this is that the story and the sagas that followed it were passed down exclusively through oral tradition, which means that some Scott or Bard essentially would memorize this entire section and would usually recite certain sections on command at gatherings or feasts. And since there's been a 200-year time difference since it was first being told to being written down, as you can expect, there's a wide variety of translations. So just to start, I've pulled some sections from the sagas. Of old was the age when Ymir lived. Sea nor cool waves nor sand there were. Earth had not been, nor heaven above, but a yawning gap and grass nowhere. Then bore sons who were Odin, Vili, and they lifted the level land, Midgard the mighty. There they made the sun from the south, warm the stones of the earth. No knowledge he had where her home should be, the moon knew not. What might was his, the stars knew not where their stations were. And these short passages might not seem that really huge in the grand scheme of the saga, but it doesn't really do the actual feat of making the world its true justice, because Ymir was the first a giant who was born into this vast and all-consuming darkness, and his sons essentially killed him, and using the viscera of his body built the world. Essentially his eyes are the moon and stars. Essentially his broken bones are the stones we walk on. And that carries with the central theme of this saga, that the act of creation can also be an act of destruction. Essentially there's always an end, and there's always this whole there's always an end and there's always a beginning. And from this act of destruction came the 9 realms, the first of which is Asgard, and the home of the Aesir gods. The second is Midgard, which is essentially the human realm, which exists as sort of a stopping point between the other 8 realms. And then there's Svartalheim, which I'm sure will resonate with any of you who know either Tolkien or Warhammer. It's a massive forged city of the dwarves, where they would make so-called their gleaming wonders and weapons and armor. Jotunheim is the land of the earth and stone giants. Muspelheim is the land of the fire giants. It's this great sweltering place of heat and lava. And then there's Vanaheim, which is the home of the second tribe of gods, the Vanya. And then there's Alfheim, the home of the light elves. And then we come to the trickier of the realms, which is Niflheim, which is sometimes described as a frozen, icy realm with no inhabitants to speak of, or sometimes it's attributed as the home of the dark elves. And then we have Helheim, which is the second realm of the dead after Valhalla, where essentially where all the worthy dead who die in battle go, but those who die of sickness or old age will go to Helheim. And so then we have the Aesir, which are the first clan of the gods, and they're more typically associated with war, strength, and fertility. And just to name a few gods to give you an idea, we have Odin, the chief of the gods. We have his son Thor, who is the god of thunder and the protector of humankind. Tyr, who is the god of war, justice, and law. And Heimdall, who is the gatekeeper to Valhalla. And then we have the Vanir, who are the second clan of the gods, who are, in complete contrast to the Aesir, are typically associated with nature, wealth, commerce, and the magical arts. And Freya, who are typically responsible for the changing of the seasons and the growing and nurturing of the crops. And their father, Njord, who is actually the patron god of sailors, which I think is pretty cool, since Massachusetts has a very heavy maritime tradition. And then, of course, we come to the creation of the first humans. Two without fate. On land they found Ask and Embla, which translates to Ash and Em. Empty of might, soul they had not, sense they had not, heat nor motion nor goodly hue. Soul gave Odin, sense gave Honir, heat gave Lothar and goodly hue. And from this action, that's why we call Odin the All-Father, because he is the father of every man, woman, and child. And that's what it is. So if you have any questions or concerns, please speak now.
So I think you might have said this, but when were these written down, and where do you find these now? How are they assembled now?
They're written as two separate collections by a bard named Snorri Sturluson, which is written in two separate styles. The one I just showed you now is from the Poetic Edda, and then there's also the prose Edda. And so basically, these stories were recovered by Snorri and basically condensed into these two texts, and it's from these that we have come to know some of these stories.
Who's the biggest distributor of these stories? How are they told throughout the United States or the world?
That's the tricky thing, because when most people hear the names like Odin, Thor, or Heimdall, the thing that usually comes to mind is some of the Marvel movies, because that's how they've been very popularized. And while there certainly are traces of their character, you're not getting the truest version of them. Really, it's more something that's meant to sell comics, toys, or some such. It's more of a popularized and well, dare I say, a commercialized version. But essentially, these stories were passed down family to family. Essentially, something I like to think was told in the great meat halls on the cold nights, or around around a crackling fire, and just trying to pass a long night. And it's essentially the way I tried to tell it to you is pretty much how it was done. It was a very very loud and dramatic, very a performative ritual.
Yeah, so that's why you kind of read the quotes like a performance.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all right. Take your time. I know I just throw a lot at you. So, yeah.
Where did you first start getting interested in this subject?
I've always been fascinated with all the it's essentially the ancient myths since I was a kid, but I've really gotten into these particular myths because I stumbled upon I stumbled upon a Neil Gaiman's a recent book adaptation of these Norse myths, which basically takes some of the stories I told you and tries to write them essentially write them down into modern English while keeping true to the same basic content. So then I was curious to find out more about like the original stories, to find out like what he was working with. And frankly, I think it's just pretty. Frankly, I just think it's pretty cool. Like the idea that essentially like, this was how we rationalized what we saw, how we saw the world. Like it tells a lot about like who we were back then.
I'm curious how these stories, if we know, may have been affected by interactions with other societies and other communities. So as the Norse, particularly as they were seafaring people, as they went out to other areas, did they collect stories from other places or?
Right. Yeah, that's something I've wondered as well, because I haven't yet found anything to confirm this, but I have a theory that like all these like Norse societies and stories may have influenced the Celtic stories as well, because a lot of the essentially a lot of the gods in their pantheon serve a lot of the same function. So, and then since they settled very heavily in like Dublin, I certainly wouldn't be surprised if some of their gods are rubbed off on some of the people that they essentially either raided or traded with.
Awesome. Well, thank you for presenting this. I didn't know about this type of history.